The dreamer of Dakar. The sun rose slow and golden over Dakar, painting the city in shades of hope and hustle. Roosters crowed from the alleys behind the sand-colored homes, and the scent of fresh tabudayen wafted through open windows. The capital city of Senegal was alive, its pulse found in the clamor of markets, the bass of Malak's music from corner radios, and the dreams whispered between neighbors over shared cups of attire. In the heart of the Medina neighborhood, beneath a faded red awning, Aissatou crouched on a plastic stool, weaving strands of synthetic hair into tight braids with swift fingers. Her work was art, precision, patience, and pride wrapped into every line she parted. She wore a bright yellow bubu that complemented her dark skin and eyes that never stopped shining, not even under the weight of 1,000 unspoken dreams. At 27, Aissatou had lived 1,000 lives. Or so it felt. Often at 9 when her parents died in a car crash near Thiès, she had been raised by her grandmother, Mama Kadi, a woman made of iron and incense. Mama Kadi taught her to never beg, never cry in public, and always look people straight in the eyes. "Your eyes are your fire," she'd said, tapping Aissatou's forehead. "Let them see you burn." Still, Aissatou burned for more than Dakar's narrow streets. She burned for Tokyo, Dubai, Paris, places she had only seen on Instagram feeds and music videos. She scrolled every night before bed, eyes devouring snapshots of rooftop dinners, oceanside selfies, and luxury handbags with names she couldn't pronounce. She didn't envy, she studied. Each post was a possibility, a glimpse into a life she promised herself she'd one day live. "I'll marry a billionaire," she often joked to her best friend Fatou as they walked home from the market, baskets balanced on their hips. "Then I'll vanish like a ghost, poof. No more sand in my shoes." Fatou would roll her eyes and laugh. "Just don't let your soul get lost chasing someone else's gold, Ice." But Aissatou would just grin, tossing her braids. "If I must sleep on silk to escape death floors, then so be it." It was during one ordinary Thursday in the market, sun beating down, motors buzzing, the smell of grilled fish wafting, that Chen Liwei first appeared. He was not what anyone expected. Tall, well-dressed, and always surrounded by quiet men in sunglasses, Liwei stood out like a diamond in the dust. Word spread quickly that he was a Chinese businessman scouting locations for a new mining operation inland. The government had rolled out the red carpet, but Liwei still wandered into the local markets himself, curious, observing. He didn't speak much Wolof or French, but he moved with calm assurance. It wasn't long before his assistant, a young Chinese woman named Mylin, found herself seated in Aissatou's chair beneath the red awning. "Small braids. Very tight," Mylin said, broken French tumbling from her lips. "No problem, Sherry," Aissatou replied, already parting the hair with a seasoned comb. "You live here looking like Beyoncé in the Sahel." Mylin giggled. Liwei watched from a short distance, arms crossed, a small amused smile on his face. He was supposed to be meeting with a supplier that afternoon, but instead, he stayed. Each tug of braid brought a new joke. Aissatou was in rare form, narrating market gossip, imitating customers, making up wild stories about tourists she'd encountered. Even Mylin couldn't stop laughing. And though Liwei didn't understand all the words, the energy was contagious. Her charisma wasn't just surface, it had gravity. When the job was done, Liwei walked over and thanked her personally, extending his hand. "Très bien," he said, nodding. "Merci, monsieur," Aissatou replied, shaking it with a sly smile. "Next time, I'll do your hair." That got another chuckle from Mylin. Liwei only smiled and said, "Maybe." And there was a next time. He returned a week later. Then again a few days after that. Sometimes with Mylin, sometimes alone, always with a reason, a question about the market, a need for directions, a recommendation for lunch. But his eyes always wandered to the stall under the red awning. Aissatou noticed. Of course she did. She wasn't naive. Life had taught her to read people the way she read signs in the sand. And Chen Liwei, for all his silk shirts and polite distance, was intrigued. Not just by her beauty, but by something else. Something raw. Something real. So, she played the game. She never dressed to impress, she didn't have the wardrobe, but she started wearing a touch more gloss, letting her laughter linger longer, and letting her eyes meet his just a second too long. She kept her distance, but not too much. Spoke freely, but never foolishly. Fatou was not amused. "You're toying with fire," she warned one evening as they sat on the rooftop eating mango slices. "You think he sees you? Really sees you?" Aissatou wiped juice from her chin and stared at the horizon, where the ocean kissed the dusty skyline. "No," she said simply. "But I see him. And I see what he represents. Options." Fatou shook her head. "Not every door worth opening leads to paradise. Some just take you further from yourself." Aissatou didn't respond. But deep inside, a voice whispered that her friend might be right. Still, another voice, louder, brusher, hungrier, insisted that this might be her one chance. What was so wrong with playing the game, anyway? A proposal in pearls. Chen Liwei didn't court Aissatou with roses or poetry, he came armed with silk, gold, and the scent of possibilities. Within weeks of their flirtations becoming something more tangible, he swept her into a different orbit. Dinners at Love Fourchette with imported wine and foie gras. Spa days at upscale resorts in Sali, where sea salt and lavender marks the scent of struggle. One afternoon, he placed a small black box in her hand, a new iPhone, sleek and silver, the kind she had only seen online. "This for you," he said, smiling. "So we can speak always." Aissatou stared at the device like it was made of starlight. She didn't ask for any of it, not out loud, but her eyes had learned to want, and he noticed. Soon, she began to return the effort in her own way. She downloaded language apps and scribbled Chinese phrases into a notebook. Ni hao, xie xie, ni han piaoliang. She'd watch Mandarin dramas late into the night, mimicking the intonation, trying to understand more than just the words. She read about Confucian values, dragon festivals, and traditional wedding customs. She didn't want to be just a pretty ornament on Liwei's arm, she wanted to match him stride for stride. Fatou, meanwhile, grew quieter. She still showed up to braid hair beside Aissatou's stall, but her laughter was shorter, her eyes more distant. One evening, she snapped, "You're starting to sound like one of those women on reality TV, always talking about handbags and facials." Aissatou pursed her lips. "Is it wrong to want more than rice and rent, Fatou?" "No. But it's wrong to sell yourself to get it." Aissatou didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, clutching the silk scarf Chen had brought her from Shanghai like it could shield her from judgment. 6 months passed like waves, one indulgence after another. And then came the embassy gala. The Chinese embassy in Dakar was hosting a cross-cultural evening, part diplomatic, part social spectacle. Guests wore formal attire, blending traditions like swirls of batik next to harmful silks. Chen arrived in a tailored navy suit, and Aissatou, on his arm, wore a custom-made gown of deep red with gold embroidery, a nod to Chinese bridal colors. Her hair was styled into an elegant updo, pinned with a small ivory comb Chen had brought from Suzhou. She had never felt more watched in her life. Not even in the market. As the night wore on, wine glasses clinked, dignitaries mingled, and the band began to play a soft instrumental. Then, as if rehearsed but still surprising, Liwei took her hand and led her to the center of the terrace beneath the embassy's glittering lights. He dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through leaves. "Aissatou," he said, voice steady but eyes hopeful, "will you marry me?" From a tiny velvet box, he presented a ring, not a diamond, but a single, flawless pearl encircled by a halo of sapphires. Pearls, symbols of wisdom, purity, and wealth in both of their cultures. She stared at it, at him, at the way everyone held their breath. And then she said, "Yes." Applause erupted. Photographers clicked. Liwei slid the ring onto her trembling finger, and for a moment, Aissatou smiled as if the world had tilted in her favor. But deep inside, a storm brewed. Was it love? Or was it relief? Was she running toward a future, or just away from her past? Back home, her grandmother was sitting on a prayer mat when Aissatou showed her the ring. Mama Kadi studied it for a long time, her fingers rough and aged, turning the pearl in the light. "He is kind to you?" "Yes." "He respects you?" "I believe so." Mama Kadi sighed. "Then I will not stop you. But remember, child, some cages are built of gold, not iron." Aissatou nodded, silently slipping the ring back into its box. Preparations began at once. The wedding would be held in Dakar, blending Chinese and Senegalese traditions in what Liwei's family called a bridge of harmony. There would be a tea ceremony and choral musicians. Red lanterns and geli head wraps. Guests from Beijing and Bombay. Tailors were hired, chefs were flown in, and social media buzzed with whispers. "She's lucky," some said. "She was nothing but a hair braider, and now look at her." Others were harsher. "She sold out. She chose money over her people." Aissatou heard it all. She smiled anyway. Smiled while fittings poked at her ribs, while stylists ran fingers through her hair like it was a canvas. Smiled as if approval could drown doubt. But when she lay alone at night, staring at the ceiling, her heart drummed questions she didn't know how to answer. The night before the wedding, Fatou came. They hadn't spoken in weeks, but she stood outside Aissatou's apartment in a plain kaftan, her face tense and tired. "Can we talk?" Aissatou let her in. The apartment was already half-packed, filled with red suitcases and wedding favors in silk bags. The scent of lavender candles filled the air, masking the tension. Fatou didn't sit. "I came to say goodbye. And to ask you, one last time, are you sure?" Aissatou blinked. "Sure about what?" "That this is your choice. Not poverty's. Not desperation's." Aissatou stood still for a long moment, eyes tracing the outline of her friend's face, the friend who knew her deepest fears, who saw her on her worst days. Then she spoke, voice quiet but firm. "Love may be a choice, Fatou, but poverty never gave me one." Fatou's eyes welled, but she didn't argue. She just reached out and touched Aissatou's hand, the one now bearing the weight of $1,000 pearl, and whispered, "Then I hope you never forget who you are." She left without another word. And Aissatou, standing in the center of her soon-to-be former life, wondered if becoming someone else was the only way to finally be seen. Silk, smoke and secrets. The wedding was a spectacle. Held in Guangzhou, China, the ceremony blended two worlds that had rarely touched. Lion dancers leapt across crimson carpets, their movements fierce and rhythmic, while Senegalese drummers beat their Sabah drums with thunderous pride. Paper lanterns floated above as incense wafted through the air like smoke from an ancient fire. Elders in embroidered bubus greeted guests beside Chen's relatives in tailored kippeos and suits. Aissatou was radiant, wrapped in a custom gold-threaded chipao sewn with African beadwork along the collar and cuffs. Her hair was braided into a crown, interwoven with red silk ribbons and cowrie shells. She smiled for the cameras, bowed when told, lifted tea to lips she barely tasted. To the outside world, she was a vision of unity. A living symbol of East meets West. But behind the beauty, cracks had begun to form. It started subtly. The morning after their arrival, Chen insisted on taking her phone. "For security reasons," he said gently. "Chinese media can be aggressive. We don't want anything leaked." She hesitated. "Even Fatou doesn't know I'm safe yet." "I'll message your friend for you," he replied, already turning away. The next day, When she greeted a Senegalese chef in Wolof during the reception rehearsal, Chen pulled her aside. "Try not to speak that language in public," he said in a hushed voice. "It confuses people. Stick to French or English." She blinked. "It's my language." "Yes," he nodded, "but this is not your country." That was the first moment she felt the bun of silk, soft to the touch, but unforgiving beneath. 3 days after the wedding, while organizing a drawer in their shared apartment in Tianhe district, she found a photo tucked into an old envelope. A young girl, maybe 13, smiling with Chen beside a cherry blossom tree. Aissatou stared. When he came home, she asked, her voice calm. "Who is she?" Chen blinked. Then sighed. "My daughter. From my first marriage. You never told me." "It didn't seem relevant," he said, pouring tea like it was nothing. "She lives with her mother in Chengdu. I haven't seen her in years." Aissatou clenched the edge of the counter. "I'm your wife. It's relevant." He waved it off. "We have a new life now. You don't need to concern yourself with the past." But his past was part of her present now, one more thing he controlled. As the honeymoon weeks wore on, the dazzling lights of Guangzhou grew dim in Aissatou's eyes. The city was a whirlwind of color, sound, and unfamiliar customs. She walked through high-end malls where no one looked like her, sat through silent family dinners where she was smiled at but never truly spoken to. At home, Chen's family called her Meili Heron, the beautiful black woman. They praised her dress, her unique charm, her poise. But never her thoughts. Never her mind. She was decoration. An exotic orchid they'd placed on a windowsill. She tried to call Fetu from the apartment landline, but the number never connected. She left voicemails. Emails. No reply. Each unanswered message chipped away at the strong woman who once joked she'd marry a billionaire and escape. Was this escape? Or was it exile? Desperate to feel real again, Aissatou sought out a local school that taught English to underprivileged children. She offered to volunteer. The principal, a kind woman named Lin Mei, was hesitant at first, but soon warmed to her enthusiasm. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Aissatou would slip away, teaching colors, greetings, and songs to kids who giggled at her accent and adored her stories of Dakar. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen. But when Chen found out, he was livid. "Why are you embarrassing us by teaching in a rundown school?" he snapped. "I want to help. I want to be useful." "You're my wife, Aissatou. You don't need to be useful. You need to be graceful." "Graceful," she echoed, her voice rising. "You mean silent." He slammed his palm on the table, and the sound rang like a slap. She didn't flinch. But something inside her curled inward, like a flower closing before a storm. The arguments grew more frequent. Over dinner. Over clothing. Over her voice. One night, she returned home from the school with paint on her dress and a bright smile. Chen stared. "You look like a street vendor," he muttered. "Do you think that reflects well on me?" Her joy evaporated. "You knew who I was when you met me," she said. "You chose this street vendor. I chose someone I thought could change." The fight exploded. Accusations. Mockery. Words she didn't know he could wield. At one point, he grabbed her wrist, not hard, but firmly enough to silence her. To remind her. She pulled away. "I am not your doll," she whispered. And that night, she locked herself in the bathroom, still in the paint-stained dress. She stared at her reflection, lip trembling, eyes dull. She sat on the cold tiles, knees pulled to her chest. And she whispered, to no one but herself. "I came for the gold, but I may live in chains." The fire beneath the silk. Aissatou didn't realize it at first, but the fire that had been smoldering inside her was beginning to burn. It started small, just a whisper, an urge. To write. To speak. To be heard. In the quiet of her bedroom, while Chen was out for business meetings, Aissatou began documenting her life. At first, it was just her thoughts, fragments of the isolation, the contradictions of her life in China, the haunting whispers of exotic and submissive. She used the pseudonym Nia, meaning a purpose in Swahili, and started a blog. She posted in French and English, explaining her experiences as a Senegalese woman married to a Chinese billionaire. She wrote about her dreams and her disillusionment. She shared the moments of beauty, Guangzhou's glittering skyline at night, and the pain, being invisible in her own marriage. The stories began slowly, anonymously at first, just a trickle of her own frustration spilling out into the world. But one evening, after sharing a particularly raw post about the loneliness of being silenced, something happened. The likes started pouring in. Comments appeared from women all over the globe. Some were African girls asking about interracial marriages and migration, others were women from all walks of life, commenting on the betrayal they felt in their own relationships. It went viral. Her blog became a safe haven for women who had never spoken about the things Aissatou was sharing. She began receiving private messages of support from women who had been in similar marriages, from those who had escaped abusive situations, and from young girls hoping for a better future than the one they saw in their own homes. But as her voice grew louder, so did the dangers. It was during dinner one night when everything changed. Chen had invited his family to celebrate a new business deal, a partnership with a Chinese mining company in Africa. The table was laden with delicacies, the conversation flowing in Mandarin. Aissatou sat quietly, a smile pasted on her face, her hands wrapped around her teacup. She tried not to think of the blog, or the power it had given her. But then the doorbell rang. Aissatou's phone buzzed on the table, an anonymous email alert. She glanced down, catching the words that made her heart freeze. Chen Liwei knows. Her stomach dropped. The email came with a warning: someone had tipped off Chen about her blog. He had been reading it, furious, searching through every post for traces of her identity. In the middle of the meal, just as the conversation was turning to business, Chen slammed his chopsticks onto the table. The room went silent. Aissatou, he spat her name as though it were poison. What is this? He thrust the phone in front of her, the screen flashing her blog, a page of her thoughts, her raw words. I warned you, he growled. I told you this life was a privilege, not a right. And now you've gone behind my back, betraying me, exposing our life to the world. Aissatou's heart raced, but she stood tall. I didn't betray you, Chen. I only told my truth. Truth. His eyes burned with rage. This is shame. You think you can speak like that about me, about my family? The room was deathly silent, his relatives watching, judging. I have given you everything, he roared, voice shaking with fury. Everything. And this is how you repay me. Aissatou's fingers tightened around her cup. It was as if something inside her had broken loose, no longer afraid, no longer silent. I didn't come here for your money, she said, her voice low but steady. I didn't come here to be a trophy or an ornament. I came here to be me. And if that's something you can't understand, then I'm not the one who has betrayed anyone. Chen's face twisted in disbelief. You are my wife, Aissatou. You belong to me. And I'll make sure you never leave this house again. The threat hung in the air like a heavy fog. Aissatou could feel the weight of it, the claws that wanted to lock her in this gilded cage forever. But then she saw the looks on the faces of his family, the way they clutched their teacups a little tighter, the way they exchanged uncomfortable glances. She stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. Silence fell again. Aissatou turned to face Chen, her back straight, her chin lifted. I may not be born of this land, she said in Mandarin, her voice echoing in the grand dining room, but I carry the sun of Africa in my voice. I am not your property. I am not your shame. I am your mirror, and you don't like what you see. She looked directly into his eyes that had once promised her the world, now empty with rage. And then, before anyone could react, she turned and walked out. She left the mansion that night with nothing but a suitcase and her dignity. The air was cold as she stepped into the night, her footsteps ringing out in the silence of the empty street. She didn't know where she was going, but she didn't care. For the first time since arriving in China, Aissatou felt like she could breathe. May, the Chinese woman married to a Senegalese man, had offered her help. May was the one who connected her to a lawyer, a quiet, steady woman named Lijon who listened carefully to Aissatou's story and agreed to help her file for divorce. Aissatou had always been proud, but now, as she sat in a small apartment May had found for her, she realized how much power had been taken from her, and how much power she still had within her. Her blood continued to grow. The women who followed her cheered her on, sending messages of encouragement, of admiration. Her story became a beacon of hope for those still trapped in their own silken cages. Aissatou knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal battles. There would be accusations. But one thing she knew for sure. She would not let anyone silence her again. In the quiet of her new home, with May's support, Aissatou began to rebuild, not just her life, but her spirit. And this time, she would do it for herself. The Pearl Reborn. Aissatou stepped off the plane in Dakar with her heart lighter than it had been in years. The air was thick with the scent of salty sea breeze and the hum of life she'd once thought she'd outgrown. She had returned to the same streets that had once whispered her name with pity, and now, as she walked through the bustling markets, the words had changed. This time, they cheered for her. The people of Dakar didn't see the girl who had struggled to find her way, who had braided hair to scrape by. No, they saw the woman who had been to the other side of the world and come back, stronger, more powerful. Aissatou had come home as a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for those who had never thought it possible to rise from where they had fallen. Her return wasn't just for her. It was for all the women whose stories had never been told, whose dreams had been crushed under the weight of tradition, silence, and fear. With the money from her best-selling memoir, Silk Chains, My Journey from Dakar to Guangzhou, Aissatou started an NGO for African women navigating international marriages. The organization was built to provide legal, emotional, and cultural support for women who found themselves trapped in foreign lands, under foreign rules, and sometimes, foreign hearts. She knew what it felt like to be silenced, to be a trophy in someone else's home. But Aissatou also knew that she had the power to rewrite her own story, and now, she could help other women do the same. Fatou was the first to visit her when Aissatou moved back into her grandmother's house. Their friendship, once fractured by ambition, had healed. Time had a way of showing them both that the real value of life wasn't in wealth or status, it was in the truth, in the bonds they shared. Aissatou's eyes filled with gratitude as Fatou embraced her. You always said you'd marry a billionaire, Fatou laughed. But I never imagined it would be like this. Aissatou smiled, her gaze wandering to the streets outside, bustling with life. I didn't marry for money, Fatou. I married to escape. I never imagined how much I'd lose along the way. Their laughter was like music, the echo of a friendship reborn. Aissatou had learned many lessons in her journey, but none as important as the ones about loyalty, self-worth, and the strength of the people she could trust. Her memoir, Silk Chains, became a sensation in Francophone Africa. It spoke to the hearts of so many women who felt their voices had been stifled, their worth measured in ways that were beyond their control. The book wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a call to arms, a manifesto for self-liberation, a reminder that no one, not even the richest billionaire, could define who a woman was or could become. One evening, Aissatou found herself sitting on a television talk show, the camera strained on her as a reporter asked a question she'd been dreading. Do you regret marrying for money? The reporter asked, his voice almost taunting. Aissatou didn't hesitate. Her smile was calm, composed, and unwavering. Money gave me the plane ticket, she said softly, but pain gave me the wings. The room went silent for a moment, and then the audience broke into applause. She wasn't just a woman who had been sold a dream. She was a woman who had reclaimed her own life from the ashes of that dream and soared to heights that no one had ever imagined for her. The applause wasn't for the book or the NGO, it was for the woman who had found herself after losing so much. Months later, Aissatou walked through the same market that had once been a backdrop to her struggles, but now, it felt different. She was no longer just the girl braiding hair at a dusty stall. She was the woman who had written her own narrative, one page at a time. Her flowing African attire swirled around her as she passed by the stalls, and the girls, the same girls who had once watched her with envy, now chanted her name. Aissatou! Aissatou! They ran up to her, their eyes wide with admiration and hope. They asked her for advice, for wisdom, and Aissatou, humbled and proud, shared with them everything she knew. She wasn't just a symbol of success, she was a mentor, a guide, and a sister. She passed the hair-braiding stall where her journey had begun. The smell of coconut oil and shea butter filled her nostrils, and for a moment, she allowed herself to pause, remembering the quiet moments spent twisting braids under the shade of the market awnings. It had been hard work, but it had given her the strength to imagine more for herself. Turning toward the camera, Aissatou smiled, a smile that radiated peace, strength, and resilience. This time, she said softly to the lens, "I'm rich in ways no currency can measure." And as the camera zoomed out, capturing the joyful chorus of the girls who had once watched her from afar, Aissatou continued on, walking through the streets of her city, no longer bound by the silken chains she had once worn. She had found freedom, not just for herself, but for all the women who would follow her path.